I'm Vic Perry and I'm at Positive Voices, the 8th National Conference of People Living with HIV and AIDS. People from all over Australia have come to Melbourne to share political, social and cultural information, and above all, to share their personal lived experiences with HIV and AIDS. To kick off the conference, we've got Carolyn Briggs to give us a traditional Aboriginal welcome.
Spirit of my ancestors live. Let the wisdom and the spirit of the generosity which Bunjil taught us influence in the way you work through these issues and problems that confront our society. Woman Jantat Merambigbi, Bunurong Nurdu, Barupton
And opening the conference is Peter Canavan, President of NAPWA, the National Association of People Living with HIV and AIDS.
The theme of this 8th conference of the National Association of People Living with HIV and AIDS, NAPWA, is Positive Voices, Strengthening the Response to HIV and AIDS. It's with great pleasure that I stand before you as your friend, colleague, Pos brother, President and old dinosaur of this association, and welcome you here to beautiful Melbourne for our 2-day gathering. It's now 3 years since our last gathering in Sydney in 1998, and I'm here to tell you that a lot of hard work by our dedicated staff, executive and committee has gone into bringing this conference to life. We must have the opportunity to come together and to meet, to speak and to share about experiences and our lived realities amongst ourselves, to consider what has been and what is to come in our response to the war against HIV, and as well to make personal and organisational commitments to the challenges that lie ahead of us. I firmly believe that only in doing so will we continue to remember our voices from the past and honour them, and inform our collective responses as we move forward as positive communities in alliance. Yesterday, many of you attended the satellite conference meetings. These separate satellite meetings were held for Indigenous people, positive women, heterosexual men and gay men. This represents a significant development from past conferences and is a step towards acknowledgement by NAPWA that we are indeed not best served by seeing ourselves as one homogenous positive community. However, NAPWA acknowledges that we are a number of communities based around the cultural context of our sexuality, our gender, our ethnicity, linked by the issues that see us as genders. This is important as community of interest based entirely on disease focus is a recipe for self-marginalisation and subordination to service provision interests, as many patient advocacy groups have already discovered. The Australian HIV community-based experience has been able to be effective because the community constructs that were in place before the disease appeared were in place. Before any notion of positive community emerged, we were mostly gay men with AIDS in this epidemic. And if I use the gay experience, for many gay men, the journey to wellness has involved many people reclaiming their gayness, and the ability to do so has often been cited as an indicator of emergent re-emergent health. And if I look around me, particularly at positive women, I will see a number of them becoming pregnant and giving birth to healthy babies, and that's another sign. It is time to acknowledge that we all have multiple social and cultural identities, and it seems to be unarguable that effective information, education, services and advocacy have to be developed with this in mind, with the person and with their place in mind, and not just the disease. Whilst many positive Australians today enjoy good health, we also need to be very conscious of the fact that a significant number of our positive population are challenged and have to live with and struggle with the effects of co-infection, psychological dysfunction, multiple diagnosis, treatment failure, side effects and toxicity, poverty and the welfare trap, to name just a few of the issues. And these are being faced on a daily basis, and we must always take these issues
So we all look forward to hearing the feedback from each satellite session on tomorrow, as we also look forward to working together to forge a bold, new and true alliance of our communities as NAPWA, through which our collective positive voices will be heard and the responses to HIV and AIDS nationally will be strengthened.
Joining Peter Canavan is Amelia McLaughlin, who has the women's portfolio on the NAPWA executive.
I'm very happy to be addressing you today as the women's spokesperson for the National Association of People Living with HIV and AIDS, NAPWA. And the other hats I wear, as Peter said, as President of the People Living with HIV and AIDS New South Wales, the Women's Support Officer at the AIDS Council of New South Wales, partner and mother. All these roles, of course, jockey for priority, but they are all connected by the string HIV plays in my life. I became involved in the HIV world after the birth of my daughter in 1994. My decision to have her came after learning AZT was shown to reduce transmission to as little as 8%. I thought this was a risk worth taking. I was exposed to unacceptable discrimination in the healthcare system during pregnancy and after delivering my daughter. I was compelled to be as informed as possible about HIV and to speak publicly about my life as a positive woman in the hope of better educating so-called healthcare professionals. This ultimately led to my involvement with NAPWA. We've been very fortunate in Australia to receive bipartisan support for funding of provisional services and information on HIV. We are at a point where people have access to treatments and are re-evaluating their lives as positive people. What priority does HIV play in their lives? As Peter has said, this is not true for all. So we must be aware of the diversity of positive life so as to best advocate and provide services to people who require them. It's an exciting time for NAPWA as we are now better resourced than we have ever been. Through NAPWA, positive people are represented on government committees, research bodies, treatment networks and education groups by positive people. We have also been put into important and relevant issues such as welfare reform, treatment trials and access and reproductive rights. This could not have been achieved without the volunteer input of positive people in the portfolios to address issues such as care support, Indigenous, international, legal, states and territories, treatments and the women's portfolio. I'm really happy to be here as a pregnant positive woman to say things have changed and improved since the discrimination I faced 6 years ago. But I'm also aware that we have a long way to go to reduce the stigma of HIV. Thank you.
And I'm speaking with Stephanie Moore and David McCarthy. And Stephanie Moore is Executive Officer of Positive Women and David McCarthy, Executive Officer of People Living with HIV/AIDS Victoria. What happened yesterday? There was a launch of a resource.
Yes, we had the Don't Just Take It booklet, which has been in process for actually 2 years because I took it over 2 years ago. And it's a guide to assist positive people to deal with discrimination. And it came about through a submission that was written by my predecessor, Philomena Horsley, and to the Victoria Law Foundation. And then we got on board with PLWHA, and together we worked on this resource booklet.
Great. And how did PLWHA get involved?
As part of our continuing collaboration with Positive Women, it's a great resource because what it provides is easy access for people to help counter some of the discrimination they suffer. I think the support of the Law Foundation and the Equal Opportunity Commission is very important, but the combination of the two organisations, Positive Women and ourselves, has been fabulous, and the fact that the funding from the Law Foundation and the support of the Equal Opportunity Commission actually gives this resource some teeth. So it's an important resource that for the positive community that I think has been sadly lacking.
And I was just wondering, has there been a real problem with discrimination for people living with HIV/AIDS over the years?
Oh, over the years, certainly. And I mean, people's stories within the book tell about those issues. And what I particularly like about the book, and I think people have commented on that, is that people have encountered discrimination, but also they've given their own strategies for dealing with that. Not just a legal strategy, but a personal strategy. Or something very simple like when you're in a stressful situation and you're not quite sure if you're being discriminated against, because sometimes it's very subtle, just take a deep breath and say and reframe that question. So, you might ask for clarification and that you're entitled to do that.
And I'm speaking to Michael Rogerson. Michael Rogerson is convener of Straight Arrows. Michael, what is Straight Arrows?
Well, Vic, Straight Arrows is the support and service group for HIV-positive heterosexual people in Victoria, men and women. We provide a variety of services, principally to people. It's run by and for HIV-positive people. We provide a variety of services, including family support, individual and peer support, financial relief, social activities, things like that.
That sounds good. Here we are at NAPWA, of course, NAPWA conference. From, I suppose, the perspective of a heterosexual man, what do you hope to get out of this conference?
Well, I guess personally, Vic, I'm interested in a couple of aspects. One was the heterosexual satellite, which was run yesterday. And secondly, on a personal perspective, I'm interested in the local political scene and the national political agenda, which we've been looking at today, and also some treatments, information and networking as well.
How did the satellite go?
The feedback I got was it was really good. We had some speakers from AIDS Line and Hep C Line who did a bit of an icebreaker, and they were fantastic. And after that we had a session on reproductive options, which I think raised more questions than in fact it answered, and it's perhaps something we have to feed back into NAPWA to look at a national level, because all of that seems to be in some sort of disarray. So
one thing I noticed today though was it mentioned a couple of times about how many women here are actually expecting with babies. Is that sort of a reflection on advancement of treatments and how well people are getting?
I certainly think that people are looking at family options and having children a lot more than they used to. Certainly 10 or 12 years ago, particularly when I was looking at that, parenting again, basically we were told to get lost. That's changed a lot, both with advances in treatment and advances, I think, in the way people actually regard HIV positive people as well.
That's great. Sounds like there's a lot of hope. Thanks, Michael. Surviving Our Side Effects, a new treatment resource produced by people living with HIV/AIDS Victoria, is also launched at the conference. John Day, President of PLWHA Victoria.
This project is a very, very ambitious undertaking, trying to provide people with information that's going to help them manage what are difficult side effects. And the one thing that we actually learnt is that there is a lot of anecdotal information that positive people have about how they've actually managed to deal with those difficult side effects. And so we attempted to distill that information and build that into our guide.
Here I am with Philip Metcalf. How are you, Philip?
Not too bad. How are you today?
Good. Now, you're on the organising committee for this conference. How did the conference sort of come together?
Well, it's something we try to hold every 2 years, and giving people, positive people around Australia, a voice to come together and talk about some of the issues that are happening in their states and so forth. This has been a little bit longer. It's taken us 3 years to get this one up and running, so we're a bit short on time. Lots of things have changed over the last 3 years since we had the last conference. Treatments have changed, side effects have become more of an issue, and now there's talk about unsafe sex practices rising on the rise and infection rates rising. So there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 3 years. So this is really prime time to have a conference as far as we're concerned. So
the sessions are reflecting those changes. There are a lot of new issues in this conference.
Some are new issues, and that's more around vaccines and treatments. A lot of the other issues are really the same issues. All that's done is they've just become more complicated over this time, and we're seeing signs now of other issues which have come across, like for instance with side effects. Side effects 3 years ago were totally different to what they are now, because we've got more information and we've got more people that have been on these pills for so long. So what's happening is we're seeing kidney failure, we're seeing diabetics, heart conditions, which we only roughly talked about 3 years ago. They were only sort of simple things. It was just starting to emerge. They've emerged now. They're here. And now we've got to try and deal with it. So yeah, some of the streams are still the same streams, but they're expanded and a bit more complicated than what they were 3 years ago.
I'm speaking to Neville Fazula. How are you, Neville?
I'm good, thank you, Vic.
Now, what are you doing here? What's your role in all of this?
My role in this, Vic, is I'm one of the Indigenous spokespersons to NAPWA. There's two positions, one which is a men's position and one that's a women's position. I fill one of them, and the other position is filled by Bev Greet, who's actually had quite an association with NAPWA for a long time in women's issues, plus Indigenous issues. So our role is basically to go back to the executive of NAPWA and report on Indigenous issues around HIV status and treatments issues. Any issues to do with HIV positive issues for Indigenous people. And my role at the conference, Bev and I facilitated a satellite day, which was specifically for Indigenous people. This year, we've had them for the last 3 conferences, and this year we had a whole new group of people come in, so it was quite a challenge not only for Bev and I but for the association as well, plus the fact that we had some very strong traditional people that were attending the conference for the first time. So yes, it posed a whole lot of different challenges and questions for us.
Well, it's probably like a reflection of all of our experiences that, that everybody's individual and people deal with HIV differently, I suppose. So, even if we're of the same cultural background or, is that the case?
Well, I'd say it's fair to say that, Vic. Within the Indigenous workshop, there were a whole lot of issues that were raised. We talked about treatments. There were different levels of experience around treatments for people. There were people that actually didn't even know what treatments were, basically, and that's due to different factors around Indigenous communities. That could be isolation, all those sorts of things, remoteness. But I suppose we all walked away from the satellite day realising that we were all separate individuals and that we all did have different issues, even though in one thing we were all common around the fact that we were all positive people.
And what do you hope to get out of the conference eventually?
Well, I suppose what we're hoping to get is a bit more of a working relationship with the national bodies, in relation to service delivery in HIV and sexual health for Indigenous people, but also to be able to be an active part of national resource development around treatment, national education materials for health workers and stuff like that. I suppose really just to have an active part within the national organisation.
To have a voice.
Yes, to have a voice, yes.
That's great. Thanks, Neville Fazula. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Vic.
Here I am with Susan Paxton. And Susan, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Now, you've been sort of attending this conference. What do you think of it so far? Like, from a perspective of a positive woman, what do you sort of see as relevant issues, or how's it related to you?
To be perfectly honest, I think the session that just before lunch, where positive people were able to stand up, have an open mic and talk about their personal experiences or their feelings, was a really, really valuable session, and I think that was probably the most heartening session that I've been to so far. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There were quite some moving experiences, moving experiences from people who, from newly diagnosed to people who've experienced with treatments.
I think it's great that people who are newly diagnosed are here. I think it's really confronting when you first get an HIV diagnosis. You crumble, you lose your self-esteem, your life is completely shattered, and to see people coming here, which is a pretty brave step to take, and starting to get involved and starting to get that message of hope, that there is hope after diagnosis, that life doesn't end, that it's not a death sentence. I think that was the most heartening thing.
To finish off the conference, a performance of traditional Aboriginal dance, followed by Peter Canavan's closing comments.
Mosquito dance is where the crews used to grab leaves and brush the mosquitoes off at night. So that's the way they used to keep the mosquitoes off.
Beforehand, and we were both talking about, and I hope this is not at all patronising, but we were talking about the fact that we had both suffered invasion in some sense. Invasion of white man into your land, and invasion into our bodies with HIV. And it's about, we were saying, learning to look at what we have in common and working together with that and moving forward from that place together. And I think if we can start to do that more and more, we'll be a better society for it. We'll recognise that we are human and that we have a lot to offer each other and humanity. Thank you, Anna Carol.
That was Positive Voices. I'm Vic Perry, and I'll see you at the next NAPWA conference.